Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum, classmates, and especially to our beloved professor in this subject. Assalamualaikum, sir, and good morning sa ating lahat in this subject. So, now I'm going to discuss the assigned topic to me, which entitled Aid in Development. So now, before going to the proper discussion of this topic, let me first define categorically what is meant by aid and development. So aid literally means a help, assist or support someone or something in the achievement of a something. So another definition is aid means to provide help or to provide some item or advice that will make something easier or that will solve a problem. For example, giving a grant to a student for college expenses is a obvious example of aid, no? So aid, kumbaga tulong sa isang tao or isang grupo. So now, what is development? So categorically, development is a process that create growth, progress, positive change, or the addition of physical, economic, environmental, social, and demographic components. So classmates, that is the categorical definition of aid and development. So classmates, let us now discuss properly the wide, deeper meaning of aid as it is applicable from country to country or anywhere in the world. So now classmates, aid is a big part of the world's development cooperation effort. So most comes from developed countries. Like for example, the USA, that is one of the developed countries in the world. But in China and countries in the Arab world are also significant contributors of aid, as are multilateral bodies like the World Bank, as well as the NGO or the non-government organization, and billionaires like Bill Gates. So mayaman pala si Bill Gates, no? Kaya niyang magbigay ng aid to different countries. So now, after giving manifestations of aid as it applicable to country, let us now define the manifestations of development. When we say development in a wider context, it is a process that creates growth, progress, positive change, or the addition of physical, economic, environmental, social, and demographic components. So what is the purpose of development, classmates? So the purpose of development is a rise in the level and quality of life of the population and the creation or expansion of local regional income and employment opportunities without damaging the resources of the environment. Development is visible and useful, not necessarily immediately, and includes an aspect of quality change and the creation of conditions for an continuation of that change. Classmates, after giving the definitions of aid and development, we have to classify from humanitarian to development aid. What is the difference between these two? No? Kasi puros mga aid din ito, part of aid din itong humanitarian at saka development aid. So in humanitarian aid is designed to save lives and alleviate suffering in the immediate aftermath of emergencies. Katulad ng gera, yung halimbawa, occupation ng Russia to Ukraine. That comes the humanitarian aid to save lives and properties of the affected civilians. Whereas development aid responds to ongoing structural issues, particularly systemic poverty that may hinder economic, institutional, and social development in any given society, and assist in building capacity to ensure resilient communities and sustainable livelihood. So, meron silang similarities, no, classmates? So, the question is, that may arises, humanitarian aid is designed to save lives and alleviate suffering during and in the immediate aftermath of emergencies, no? Okay, classmates, moving on, after giving the slight difference between humanitarian and development aid, these two, both humanitarian and development aid, are related, no? And different forms of aid often have both humanitarian and development components. So in development aid, classmates, it can exist without humanitarian aid, particularly in developing countries that do not have humanitarian crisis, like for example in the Philippines. But it also often exists in addition to humanitarian aid during and after crisis. So for example, if an earthquake strikes a country, short-term humanitarian aid is needed. So this includes the delivery of food and water to the victims, the provisions of temporary shelter as well as the health services to the victims. So malino, no, ang intention or purpose of humanitarian aid. So after giving the manifestation of both the humanitarian and development aid, we will now go to the types of development aid as it is defined in my report. So number one types of development aid is we have tied aid, untied aid, project aid, resource aid, and the technical aid. So in tied aid, it is spent in the country where it originates rather than in the country receiving the aid. So at least 20% of developmental aid is formally tied, no? So much more is informally tied. So that is organizations spend money in countries other than the ones they are aiding, so thereby supporting the other economies rather than the developing economy. So that is tied aid, no, classmates? So in untied aid naman, it's conversely, untied aid can be spent wherever the recipient country wishes. For example, classmates, an NGO or the non-government organization might spearhead efforts to build a new hospital in the developing nation, like the Philippines, and hire local engineers and construction contractors to complete the work. So by making use of untied aid, the donor country invests both in improved medical services and in the local economy. So malaki ang pagkakaiba ng tied at saka untied aid, no, classmates? So project aid naman, when we say project aid, it is typically involves providing funds for specific projects such as building a school or hospital. Project aid can allocate NGO funds to different areas such as procuring supplies and coordinating workers yung workers doon mismo sa locality kukunin. Kumbaga, hindi taga-ibang lugar, mismo residente ng lugar kung saan kukunin yung mga trabahante. So in other words, sa resource aid naman, resource aid means an aid helps to supply resources in areas of critical shortages. So this could be supplies of food and water in a drought or famine-stricken area, or they could be medical supplies to refugee camps. So NGO or the non-government organization might also use their local connections to create reliable supply lines in politically unstable areas. So, sa magulong lugar, doon pumapasok ang resource aid. And the last, but not the least, the technical aid as one of the types of development. This development aid can also provide technical assistance and training to help give local business owners, construction workers, engineers, doctors, nurses, and educators the tools they need to assist their communities and teach others. Malinaw, no? Yung mga technical working group, kumbaga. Okay, classmates, let us proceed. So, one question might arise. Does aid have a positive impact on economic growth? What can you say, classmates? So, I think there is a positive impact on economic growth. Yes. So, there has been lately a body of evidence produced by researchers using longer and better economic data and models. So, this evidence suggests that aid has promoted economic development in developing countries like Philippines on average and over the long run. So, what are those, or sino yung mga authorized na gumawa nitong mga ganitong mga gawain, no? So we have the UNU wider. This is the research group or research experts that has estimated that if a country were to receive an inflows equal in value to about 10% of its national income each year for over a generation, then its average growth rate would be about 1 percentage point higher than it would have been otherwise. But of course, most countries, no, even low-income ones, receive aid in much smaller volumes. So we need to be realistic about what aid can deliver. And we also need to understand that the benefit of aid tend to accumulate over the long term. So big impacts may not be obvious from one year to the next, but rather after decades or more of stable support. So moving on, classmates, another question may arise. So, what is the role of governance and institutions in the success or failure of aid efforts? So, I think, classmates, this is one of the suggested best answers, that good governance is important for poverty reductions. This sounds a bit like the good governance agenda revisited, but our research has actually been quite critical of that approach. But however, it is also clear that state capabilities influence development processes and that fragile states have tagged behind others in meeting development goals. Classmates, moving on, after determining the different types of development aid, humanitarian aid, and some other aid. So when many people think of foreign aid, it is also called foreign aid. So they picture NGO workers providing medical care or handling out supplies in the aftermath of a hurricane, for example, or an earthquake. So they might also think of providing food to people living in poverty. While this kind of immediate aid is, of course, crucial, it's not the only type of aid. One other vital category of foreign aid is development aid. So while the scenarios described above involving meeting immediate needs, development aid focusing on meeting long-term needs. So in other words, it goes deep to identify and address underlying causes and helps to create foundations to improve conditions over the long-term. Classmates, about foreign aid, I think malinaw na sa atin lahat, no? So classmates, thank you for listening, and rest assured that this discussion may reach your favorable understanding on the subject matters. Thank you. Wassalam.